Senator Chamberlain.
Thank you, Madam President. Members, I move that the foregoing recommendation in the Conference Committee report on House File Number 4 be now adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Conference Committee.
To the motion, explanation of the bill.
Thank you, Madam President. Members, I will start by saying this on the front end. I thank Senator Rest, Senator Dame, Senator Miller, and Senator Senjum for their help, support in getting through the Conference Committee. I will say that the House and Senate Tax Committee worked well together. We had a little strain in it. I appreciated working with them. With that, I'm going to give a quick summary. Members, you have the spreadsheet on your desk, if it's still there. Quick overview of what we've done. We dropped the bracket reduction. We kept the Social Security subtraction Senate position. However, the numbers changed a bit. The Senate calculation stayed the same. We just put more money to it. We added the 529 plan, college savings plan. We heard it in the Senate as well as they heard it in the House. We also adjusted the non-refundable student credit for loans. We modified the R&D tier rates and alternative simplified credit. So the R&D was modified a bit, but we still have it. We also modified the refundable credit for the taxes paid for Wisconsin reciprocity agreement. We had various K-12 provisions, including increasing inflation, indexing for inflation, increasing the income caps for K-12, pre-K to 12 expenses that already exist in law, subtractions and deductions. We also took the governor's position on the child and dependent care credit. We modified that a bit. We just reduced it a bit, but we took that. We also added in the credit for beginning farmers. We removed the stillborn language that was in the bill. There was some controversy about that, so we just removed it. We couldn't come to an agreement. We added the governor's angel investment credit for 2 years. We added a conformity account the House had for better management, trying to better manage conformity issues at the beginning of sessions, so we don't have to give them some authorization to the department. Sales and use tax, we added a refund for construction materials for local government, a small addition for telecommunication equipment, fiber and conduit only, suite licenses, modifying suite licenses for stadiums. They had not been taxable, and so we're trying to clarify language for the department for those people who lease suites, and they should not have to be taxed on certain modifications, not complete, but there are modifications there. We did add the tobacco items along with the cigars. Estate tax, we took a House position and brought that forward earlier. Property tax, statewide business property tax, CI, we took the levy freeze at 2018 level and exempted the first $150,000 from taxation and valuation. We also added something for border city enterprise zones one time in 2018-19, boosted that to $3 million and added Taylor's Falls, put some more money in the pot for that, recognizing the difficulties with northwest Minnesota in the Taylor's Falls region of the state. Still have LGA, took the Senate position on LGA. And we did add, members, a provision for adjusting, there's a program in the state, some counties, a lawsuit a while back, Wabasha County, where local officials were taking money from traffic violations, diverting it to causes that were illegal per state law. So what we've done there is LGA will be reduced for cities and counties who continue the diversion program on a dollar-for-dollar basis for the money that they divert illegally to other programs and don't report to the state by law. We also took the House position on maximum effort loan aid, help schools pay off and get out from under the debt, so we give them some money for that. We have the school ag bond at 40%. Private letter rulings we took from the House for DOR issues. And I might add, we also took a provision for debt forgiveness for college loans. If their debt is forgiven, we will not then require it to be added or included into their taxable income. And members, beyond that, a couple non-money issues. We did not ban the use of plastic bags. We did ban the use. We did ban local governments from imposing taxes or fees on paper or plastic bags. So, members, that pretty much covers it covers the highlights. So, just quickly here to preface this again, is this bill helps senior citizens. This bill helps farmers. This bill helps college students, and it also helps K-12. An aside there, members and Madam President, is with K-12 we added another year of debt levy equalization, $14 million a year for 2 years. The bill also helps hometown businesses, Main Street, Minnesota, and it also helps families with children, independent daycare. So seniors, students, schools, families, small businesses, farmers. This tax bill helps all those people, and it will help improve our economy, charge economic growth for those challenges we're going to face in the future. With that, Madam President, I will stand for any questions, comment.
Discussion to the motion. Senator Dietzick.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Chamberlain, for your work on this bill. Thank you, members of the conference committee. I followed along like the public. I was not on the conference committee, so I kind of watched the bill when it was in conference committee, and it seemed to move, at some point it moved pretty quickly without a lot of discussion. There are some good items in the bill. Senator Chamberlain mentioned a bunch of them. Several items came from last year's tax bill, including the 529 college savings plan, the student loan payments tax credit, the dependent care credit. I appreciate that coming in there. We have the beginning farmer tax credits, which I think is very helpful in there to help more and more farmers, and especially from my perspective, a lot of people of color who might want to become farmers. There's credits in there to help them. And also the school bond ag credit, which we also had in the bill last year, that will help hopefully pass some referendums in and help school districts in rural area. The bill also has an exemption for the State High School League, which has been in discussion here, and I know Governor Dayton supports. Members, this bill is a $1.3 billion tax bill. Let me say that again, $1.3 billion. There's a lot of expensive items in this bill. Currently, nearly 50% of Social Security recipients do not pay taxes. This bill pays $217 million to do an additional Social Security subtraction. I know a lot of states do that, but for $217 million, I would like to be able to help all of our seniors. The bill also spends a lot of money on the wealthy and big businesses. A lot of Minnesotans will not see tax cuts in this bill. For your average homeowner, for their property taxes, they will get a reduction on average of 0.3%, where commercial and industrial properties will get on average a 23.5% tax cut. So there is some unbalance here. The Senate bill, as it left the floor, did not have anything relating to tobacco taxes, and this bill cuts tobacco taxes, and it does a cost savings for big tobacco. There's also several restrictions on local government in this tax bill. Members, this is a large bill that will jump even bigger next year. In 2020, actually, it will go to $1.4 billion. I was hoping the conference committee should have moved more to the middle. The Senate tax bill was $900 million, the House tax bill was $1.35 billion, Governor Dayton's tax bill was $280 million. In the negotiations going forward, I urge you to come a little closer to the governor's position, because I do think we need a tax bill. I do think we could come together and get a good tax bill. The bill in this, the language in this bill has several provisions that Governor Dayton has said he will veto. Provisions including scholarships or vouchers. And relating to that, we actually had several provisions that we passed on this floor that amended that. Senator Dibble had some language that made sure the Safe and Secure School Act, the bullying bill, was included under the definition of qualified schools. And Senator Hoffman made an amendment that I believe was tweaked and is still in the bill, but there were several things in there, including that. I also had a bill, an amendment that Senator Chamberlain that you accepted on pensions. So we are doing Social Security cuts for many Minnesotans, 217 million, but the amendment that I put on there was to look at police and fire pensions. And so several Minnesotans right now, they have their retirement income is taxed. And so as part of a parity and fairness issue, we thought we should look at who is paying taxes on their retirement income and who is not, and of this group that is not, is there something that we could do to help them? And that is not included in the bill. I also had an amendment that was accepted, that was Senator Fischbach's bill, that dealt with accessibility home modifications for people with disabilities. And again, I know it costs money, and so we said he'd consider it in conference committee. And usually when that conference committee target goes down, then I understand why it wouldn't be included. But this bill, the cost actually went up, and so again, it wasn't included. So that's a little disappointing. But I think the larger thing is just the concern of what this large spending will do going forward, and can we afford it? And so I believe we can do better. And so with that, I urge a no vote.
Senator Ralph.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to make a simple comment. I just received word here over the weekend that one of the major employers in the St. Cloud area is going to move an operation and expand an operation in another state. And the stated reason was succinctly economic conditions. So I think as we do this, as we look at the tax, as we look at how Minnesota looks towards business, we need to remember that whatever we do in this state that imposes a tax or imposes obstacles for business growth, that there are other states out there that are looking at that. They see it, they know it's there, and they will compete. I think that the approach that we are taking in this tax bill is a good one. It puts money back into the state. It promotes growth, which, if properly done, promotes more revenue. So I would encourage that we vote a yes vote on this bill.
Senator Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Ralph yield to a question?
Senator Ralph will yield. Senator Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Ralph, which provision in this tax bill did the company say would change their mind and keep them from relocating?
Senator Ralph.
Well, I guess that's a rather broad question. I really couldn't answer that, and the reason I couldn't answer it is because they said general economic conditions. My comment was to the fact that if we improve those economic conditions, there's less likelihood that such a step will be taken by a company in the state.
Thank you.
Senator Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Ralph continue to yield to a question?
He will. Senator Schoen.
Senator Ralph, what part of this tax bill would increase and improve the economic conditions, or which specific economic condition for the company would be changed by this tax bill that would keep them from moving?
Senator Ralph.
Well, I can, thank you, Mr. President. I would suggest that the recapture on investment property, the Section 179, would be a direct benefit to this company.
Senator Schoen.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. And I know Senator Ralph, I'm sure you read the paper just like the rest of us, and there's plenty of folks that are even saying the economic conditions are really good in Minnesota. and it may not be something that's specific, or maybe they've gotten a break. It would be very interesting to hear more details about what options were made or offers were made to the company that was going to move. I know that we've had other companies in the state of Minnesota that have left in downtime and extreme uptimes, because when somebody's going to basically give you a full gift, you can't compete with that, no matter what you do, other than to have zero taxes. And that just doesn't operate. Minnesota right now has a great economy. We had an article in a paper that I just read today that said we can't even find employees. We can't find trained employees to do the jobs and fill jobs that are available. Minnesota is in good shape. We certainly don't need to have a $1.3 billion tax cut. We've got agencies that are scrambling, and this is where money is going, is to tax cuts mainly for the wealthy. When we have individuals that are in nursing homes, in our prisons that need to be guarded, in our security hospitals that need to be guarded and treated, and we're short-stroking a lot of our agencies that take care of the vulnerable and the sickest to do this.
Senator Ralph.
Thank you, Mr. President. Not to take exception, but there are several indicators that while everything appears to be rosy, first of all, in 2016, Minnesota had a gross domestic product of 1.9%. That ranks 23rd in the country. That's pretty low. That's pretty bad. What's more important, the general economic attitude that this state projects is one of not being friendly to business. And you talk to businesses, even though they're trying to grow, the regulations, the taxes they face, the individual income taxes, which is something is being addressed in this bill, the corporate income tax. These are all things that place a burden on Minnesota businesses and on growth. And I submit that it's been proven, if you reduce taxes in a proper fashion, you encourage businesses to grow. You encourage investment. There has been a massive departure of wealth from this state. That wealth takes with it the payment of taxes, the very revenues that Senator Schoen referred to that will fund the very things that Senator Schoen referred to. So I would just like to point out that this is the first time we've had an opportunity in many, many, many years to provide relief to both the individual taxpayers and to the businesses in this state. One final note, this is not a $1.3 billion tax bill, it's a $1.1 billion tax bill. So I think we need to be sure that we look at the broader picture and realize that by reducing the size of government and reducing the size of the burden placed on our businesses and individual taxpayers, we're actually going to grow and increase the ability of to collect revenues to support our programs. Thank you.
Senator Schoen.
Mr. President, would Senator Ralph yield to a question?
He will yield. Senator Schoen.
Senator Ralph, are you able to cite a source about the massive departure of wealth from the state of Minnesota?
I do not have
Ralph.
the specific information on that. However, there are numerous journals, financial journals. There's numerous financial information that shows that over the past 10 to 12 years, there has been a departure over $12 billion in individual wealth from the state. That's a lot of earning power, but more importantly, that's a lot of investment power. And if we keep losing people who want to invest because of things like estate taxes, or in Minnesota, inheritance taxes, if we keep taxing people's Social Security, people are going to leave. They go where the best deal is, notwithstanding the fact that we have this lovely thing called winter and that we have this wonderful thing in the summer, however, called the fishing opener. People will only stay around for so long. As long as we keep picking their pockets, they're going to look to the place where they can find a better environment.
Thank you,
Senator Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, the rhetoric's quite well done here. Picking pockets, I guess, you know, getting our streets plowed, or police officers on the street like me, I'm really sorry that we're picking your pockets to keep communities safe. Well, I'll tell you, here's the other thing. 1,100 people in Minnesota, I think that was the estimation on who would benefit from the estate tax. Listen, I represent communities that are far from the 1% who benefit the most from this tax bill. And those folks are sick and tired of their pockets being picked in favor of corporate interests from other states. It's about time we look at our neighborhoods and people in Minnesota. Put them first for once.
Senator Frantz.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to this bill, and I want to offer a few thoughts for Senator Ralph and my colleagues in this chamber. There's two questions we're talking about here that relate to this omnibus tax bill. One, how good is it in Minnesota right now? And two, what's the right tax bill for the people of Minnesota? I'm not sure whether I'm alone in cheering for Minnesota right now or not. This state is an excellent place to do business. The first question was, it's been proven that tax cuts are going to benefit the state of Minnesota. Well, I'd ask our neighbors to the south in the great state of Kansas how their 2013 tax cuts made them look. I think most people would say it devastated the state, and they are still scrambling to get out. We want to be different from that. Second, the massive departure of wealth. Senator, I must humbly disagree with you. If I'm not mistaken, in 2015, Minnesota tax filers reported the largest number of individual $1 million incomes in the history of our state. That does not sound like a massive departure of wealth. That was after we increased taxes on the top 2% of Minnesotans, and when it was after, it was predicted that they would all go leaving. We have great schools, we have great roads, we have great services, we have great public employees. I'm cheering for Minnesota to be recognized for what it is, which is a great state to do business. And I'll hope that I won't be accused of repeating myself, but I mentioned on the floor of this body earlier this session, in 2015, CNBC said Minnesota is the #1 state in the country to do business in. Well, you can do what you want to us, but I'm not going to stand here and listen to us badmouth the great state of Minnesota. Thanks very much, Mr. President.
Senator Ralph.
Will Senator France yield for a question?
He will yield. Senator Ralph.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator France, do you believe that helping out the lowest tax bracket in the state of Minnesota, the taxpayers in that bracket, is helping out the 1%?
Senator Frantz.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Ralph, although I'm not quite sure I understand the question. Do I believe that lowering taxes on the lowest tax-paying group is good for the top 1%?
That's
Senator
the question.
Ralph. Senator Frantz.
Well, if you're talking about the tax cut for the lowest group by itself, that's going to be good for everybody. But the question we're asking this body is, at what cost? If we cut taxes, are we cutting services? And the point I'm making is that in Kansas, just to take an example, they said, let's cut taxes, it'll boost economic growth. It did not, and now they're dealing with a much more serious situation. So to the extent I understand your question, those tax cuts would be good for the lowest tax filers. Keeping in mind we have a percentage of the population of Minnesota that pays no taxes at all. The tax cut for them obviously is no help. And I'm not cheering against the top 1% either. I want all Minnesotans to prosper, and I think the road we're on is the right one. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Ralph.
Senator Ralph.
Thank you, Senator France. So as we see the idea that somehow this tax bill is only going to benefit the corporate interests, the wealthy, that it is going to somehow create a separation or a division and is going to further build this divide that everyone seems to think exists between the 1%ers and the rest of the state, I submit that the things that are important are that the 1%ers pay about 80% of the tax, and that the lowest income bracket, the help for those people are the working families, the people that actually fuel the pardon me, the businesses that provide the services to those businesses, and helping them can do nothing but help our state. Thank you.
Next on my list is Senator Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. And thank you, Senator Dietrich, for pointing out that the provision that I wanted as an amendment, and I'm having a hard time with the 300 and some odd pages, 386 to be exact. I tried looking for it just in this short notice, and I wonder if Senator Chamberlain would yield.
Senator Chamberlain will yield. Senator Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Chamberlain and members, you know, as Senator Champion said earlier, that when we hold the upper body position, when we go through conference committee, we bring back to the floor, we hope that it looks like the same thing as it did when this left this body and coming back. And so could you help me please understand, Senator Chamberlain, just what in the provision, the amendment that I gave you that was accepted on this floor, what is it that passed? And if you could explain how it passed and what part of it is still missing, I'd appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr. President, Senator Hoffman, and members. As we discussed at length for that seven hours on the floor when the bill initially came up, I explained that currently Minnesota law, 2008 Minnesota court case, students going to private schools cannot be denied special education services from the local school district. They cannot be denied. That's according to the Minnesota Supreme Court relied on not only Minnesota statute and law, but also U.S. code and law to come to that conclusion. To facilitate that and support the schools, their shared time revenue with the state as well. So that was the initial discussion. So it was a duplicative sort of thing you were requesting. It wasn't needed to start with. But on page 44 of the bill, line 4424, we did add some clarifying language that said, special education services. A student's receipt of qualified scholarship under this section does not affect the student's eligibility for instruction and service under section 125A18 or otherwise affect the student's status under federal special education laws. So the concern to get services for and to children who need special education under federal law is addressed in several ways in the bill. So page 44 reemphasizes the fact that we require the public schools to provide that service, and then we provide shared time revenue. Thank you.
Senator Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. And although Senator Chamberlain, I appreciate your attempt at getting to the heart of my discussion. My discussion was more around the access and not discriminating against somebody having access to a public, in this case, in a private school that is in a potential receiving public funds. And so the language that I had was the mandatory inclusion of people with disabilities. It wasn't about the services under special education and or related services, which we know children that are in a private school have just as much of a right to special education and or related services as anybody else, because that in our state's constitution is a mandatory right, and as well as it falls under the federal law, which of course was, when you want to talk about Mills versus DC, or you want to talk about the ARC versus the state of Pennsylvania, if you want to talk about how that led to a Supreme Court decision, which led to a law in 1975, which gets reauthorized every 4 years, that guarantees certain children that meet certain categorical criteria the right to a free appropriate public education. I wasn't talking about that. What I was talking about was specifically denying somebody access or a right. And those are provisions that you find in Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act from 1973. And when that lays across the line, folks, is saying that you're not going to discriminate against somebody with a disability because of certain characteristics having access to. What we find in private schools is that unequivocally, people with disabilities are being denied access to the same opportunities. So my language that I had that we all voted on in here and that passed, went forward, was not about special education and or related services, was about access, which is equalizing that opportunity for all to have. So I'm saddened to see that once again, we say we like people with disabilities, but we don't follow through. And I'm sorry I'm getting a little emotional about this, Mr. President, but it just makes absolutely zero sense to me that if you're going to give a corporation opportunity to give money to a private entity and you want people with folks to go to the school, then you should follow the same guidelines and procedures that are in place for every public school in the state of Minnesota. Which, by the way, Mr. President and members, if I just come here, I have a guaranteed right to a free public education, as Article 13 in our state constitution absolutely says we do as a student within the state of Minnesota. What I'm saying here is, in this tax provision, when you give, Mr. President and members, organizations the ability to get tax levied, the tax deduction that they get, that's potential public dollars that could have gone toward public education or could have gone toward the public good. And in this case, it's not going to. I'm not going to get into a constitutional argument because you brought in a constitutional person from Washington, D.C., that there was a constitution. What I'm talking about is specifically related to Section 504 of the Rehab Act. And the language I had that we voted on, it's really sad to see that it did not follow through. And for some reason, I don't know if you didn't understand what I was talking about, but there is a difference between getting free or public education when it comes to special education and related services, and there's also a difference between the fact that you have to have accessible entrance to get there without any barriers, and this is what I was getting at. We are now putting barriers up for people with disabilities to get education in Minnesota. It's a sad day. I hope people vote no on this and send it back. Please, Governor Dayton, get in here and help fix this bill. Thank you.
Senator Chamberlain.
Yeah, I will take some level of offense, as should everybody in this body, to Senator Hoffman somehow implying that Senator Chamberlain or any other individual in this body somehow doesn't care about children with disabilities. So I take personal offense, Senator Hoffman, and this bill guarantees free access to public education under federal idea. Any way you cut it, any way you say it, how many times you say it, Senator Hoffman, members, Mr. President, it doesn't change the fact. The law is the law. The court cases have been laid out. You cannot deny them. Not only can you not deny them the services, and does the state reimburse those schools for those services, all these facilities under federal law have to provide the access to people to come into their buildings. So, members, have a care. There's nothing in this bill that discriminates against anybody. There is nothing in this bill prevents access to the buildings, and there's nothing in here that says that children can't get access to that service. In fact, it says they must have access to it, reaffirms that, and any other argument is a straw dog, a red herring. It just doesn't exist. And the buildings have to comply by federal law and state law and code. So I'd like to end it there, but if you care to continue, I guess that is your option, Senator Hoffman.
Senator Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Senator Chamberlain, I apologize if I got you riled up there. I don't want to make this a personal discussion because, you know, a great congressman from Minnesota taught me a long time ago that education and health and human services is not a partisan issue. It's nonpartisan. It should be leave your ego at the door and let's get this going. And I'll never forget those words. And those of us that know him well, and those words echo in my head. I'm just merely, Mr. President and members, talking about the mandatory inclusion of people with disabilities. Nowhere in this section does it say that a private school has to accept somebody with a disability, whereas in public schools, that's not even a question. You have to accept that. And understandably so, there are two different issues we're arguing. And please don't take this personal, but the argument that's in this current language is about special education services. Absolutely agree with that. But there's a long pause, and but it nullifies everything prior. The but clause here is that you still aren't showing that you will not you're still showing that a child with a disability doesn't have equal access to the program itself, and that's my whole point. So, members, I wish we vote no on this.
Next on the list is Senator Klein.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a couple quick things. Earlier it was mentioned that Minnesota is the 23rd largest GDP in the nation, and that's pretty bad, I think was the comment made. My research suggests, just through a quick Google search, that we're actually the 16th largest GDP in the nation and the 21st largest state. So we're actually bigger than our population basis. I'm not sure if per capita GDP is what was being referred to there, but that number also is not accurately expressed. But I specifically, in the bill, just wanted to briefly touch on the tobacco tax indexing repeal. And I know that wasn't a part of the Senate initial tax bill. I respect that. I'm regretful to see that it came back from conference committee with that provision in. It's a very small monetary part of a very large bill, members, but I encourage our conference committee leads in future negotiations to attempt to get that removed. It's just bad policy. We know that tobacco taxes do have an impact on tobacco use rates. They do have an impact on public health. They decrease youth rates of tobacco use. It is a very effective public health measure to keep tobacco taxes high and to index them in the future into inflation. I can't help but notice that the $33 million that we're going to save on that tobacco tax repeal, which will go directly to large multinational corporations like Philips, could almost exactly be matched by my earlier tax amendment, which would have equalized referendum income to schools across Minnesota. But it would also put a lot of policemen on the streets, as Senator Schoen mentioned, and I think there's just a lot better ways that we could use that money. So with that, I oppose the bill.
Senator Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Chamberlain yield for a question?
Senator Chamberlain will yield. Senator Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Chamberlain, could you provide some additional information on the non-refundable credit equity opportunity scholarships, sometimes referred to as NEO vouchers, about the costs and also some of the main provisions? If you could just review that, because I understand they changed since we last discussed this on the floor. Thank you.
Senator Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Clausen. Some additional changes. As you recall, on the floor we had an amendment. We took transportation credits. So we put transportation credits in there, allowing students the ability to get money if they desire to get reimbursed for transportation for transportation they use to get to another public school. Secondly, we added the provision for the confirming the special education needs of children that they cannot be denied. Thirdly, we added charter schools. The House had a position where we took from the $35 million, we made $33 million available for the private scholarships and $2 million available for charter school scholarships, grants. So they'd be grants at charter schools, be administered in the same way. So those, if I recall, those were the three the main changes to the scholarship credits. Otherwise, scholarship credits remain basically the same as they left the floor.
Senator Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Chamberlain, for that explanation. I think over the weeks since this has been introduced, I've been thinking about what exactly we're trying to accomplish, or what's the purpose of this provision in the tax bill. And the first thing that comes to mind is, are we trying to expand school choice options? And yet in Minnesota, we've been really one of the leaders in this area. We offer a number of options to families, like charter schools, homeschooling, magnet schools, shared time, open enrollment between districts, and open enrollment internally. Many districts have that provision. Post-secondary education options offer qualifying students the option to enroll in college courses, often at their home school or on college campus or online. And the state helps fund international baccalaureate advanced placement programs. And also our public schools in Minnesota fund and provide transportation textbooks, nursing, counseling, and special education services to private schools currently. Another thought that comes to mind is this something to do with student achievement. And I think Minnesota taxpayers really expect that any institution receiving public funding will be accountable for how those funds will be used and will really follow all applicable state and federal laws and regulations. And this is really difficult to quantify since private schools in Minnesota are not subject to the same accountability measures as our public schools. We really do not have a common measure to compare public school students to private. Minnesota private schools that we know are exempt from state testing requirements and from reporting information on student progress or achievement. State testing measures such as MCA scores are also not required of private schools. What we do know is that there's been a number of studies in other states on this particular issue. Studies since the 1990s in Milwaukee, Cleveland, Washington, D.C., Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Indiana, and most recently last week, North Carolina legislature passed a law requiring a study to compare students that are enrolled in tax credit scholarships or vouchers or other types of public subsidized education funding to public school students. In 2015, a study that was sponsored by the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability, and I quote, has not found any statistical evidence that children who utilize vouchers or tax credit scholarships perform better than children who remain in public schools. Another argument that's been used that education tax credits will allow lower income families to receive a tax credit and will benefit by receiving scholarships. Well, there was a 2016 study by the Nonpartisan Institute of Taxation and Economic Policy. They issued a report entitled State Tax Subsidies for Private K-12 Education. And again, I'm quoting from the report. Rather than enhancing educational opportunities, tax subsidies for private education often benefit students already enrolled in private schools while reducing the amount of revenue for public schools. Worse still, they undermine support for public education and give credence to the false notion that citizens who send their children to private schools have no obligation to support public schools. Another study in 2015, the Center for Tax and Budgetary Accountability did an analysis of the Indiana School Choice Scholarship Program. Indiana students receiving tax credit-supported scholarships were overwhelmingly from urban and suburban districts. 84% were from those areas. Over 60% of the students receiving the scholarships were white. Research has also found that 80% of the tax credit scholarships are directed to students already enrolled in private schools. And Stanford University study indicated test score gains were insignificant. There are a number of reasons to not support this segment of the legislation. The first one is state revenue is being reallocated from potential general fund dollars. I've added this up, and over 5 years, we're talking about $138.2 million being diverted from state revenue. Wouldn't that be nice on the per pupil allocation if we'd allocate that amount of money over the next 5 years? Disguised voucher programs administered through the tax code circumvent the state constitution, prohibiting on the public funding of religious schools, in which some private religious schools have biblical versions of science and history or have hiring and enrollment discriminatory practices that are prohibited by public institutions. I think also we need to remember that public education enrolls and educates all students. Families do not choose private schools. Private schools choose families. Private schools choose who they enroll, in some cases through an extensive administrative process requiring a review of academic transcripts, written essay, interview, in addition to a determination on how the student will enhance the private student body. What type of special talents might that student have, either academically or in extracurricular activities? Private schools also can choose who they will disenroll without the due process requirements public schools must abide by. and private schools are not bound by integration regulations, teacher licensing standards and requirements, state curriculum standards, or state testing accountabilities. There are a few accountability measures for the new scholarships, and looking at that, there's not a lot of oversight in how these will be administered. Tax deductions and non-refundable credits are of no help to low-income families that earn too little to owe state taxes, so it really benefits upper-income households. And I think lastly, over 60% of the Minnesotans in a 2016 poll conducted by Morris Letterman Company opposed vouchers tax credits for private religious schools, and this correlates with the National Phi Delta Kappa and Gallup poll that only 31% of the Americans favor allowing students and parents to choose a private school to attend at public offense. And I just want to go back and lastly state, remember, families do not choose private or parochial schools. Those schools choose the families that they're willing to admit. Thank you.
Senator Chamberlain.
Thank you, and thank you, members. Mr. President, thank you, Senator Clausen. I would be happy to sit down with any member and read through this section of the legislation line by line and assure you that, Senator Clausen, there are all kinds of accountability measures in here. But let me go back for a second. I did forget one thing. So we got the charter school things in there. We got the confirmation for the special education children. We have transportation scholarships, transportation credits. I did forget one. It also allows the contributions to qualified public school foundations. You can find the definition of that on 39. So it also goes out to try to help out those public school foundations in various ways as well. You did answer my question about what in the world is a neo-voucher. There are no vouchers in this bill. Say it again. I'll repeat what I said to Senator Hoffman. Say it as many times as you want. There's no vouchers in this bill. These are tax credits. We give tax credits for a WARE program pre-K. You give a tax credit, you give money to a family so they can send their student, their child, to a preschool of their choice, public, private, otherwise. We give grants to colleges, grants, public money for grants for students to attend colleges, private colleges or public universities. We give all kinds of credits and exemptions to people for religious and non-religious activities in our tax code. So it's no different than all those things, members. But it all boils down to this, and this is all I'll say on it. We can rattle off study after study. I got 13 studies, gold standard studies from University of North Carolina and University of Arkansas, 13 gold standard studies, 10 found positive improvement, 2 were neutral, 1 was negative. But all this aside, what are facts got to do with it? The bottom line is this is about helping kids, giving an opportunity to kids who are failing where they're at now, allowing kids and parents the opportunity to be liberated from the place they're at, to find opportunity in education where they couldn't find it before. It's not an indictment on public schools or teachers or any place you taught or had oversight over. Nothing to do with that. It's about the kids, getting it to them, giving them a shot, giving them an opportunity at something. So that's the bottom line with this opportunity scholarship credits. It's about kids, about getting something to them, giving them some hope. It's a small amount of money, $35 million a year out of an $18 billion bill. The tax bill also includes ag bond credits for rural schools, as well as debt levy equalization money for other schools, $14 million a year. So we're helping. It's not an either or. We can do both of these things. So with that, thank you, Mr. President.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, Senator Chamberlain. Oh, Senator Chamberlain.
Yes, okay. You almost got tired of hearing my voice, but just to wrap this up. Members, this is about opportunity for Minnesota. First time in many, many years. This is about opportunity for every Minnesotan. This is about allowing Minnesota to again thrive and not simply survive. At every level, every citizen, everywhere. A couple clarifications here is that The Bureau of Economic Analysis, a government agency, we all love the government agencies, they never are wrong, right? Bureau of Economic Analysis, 2016 GDP for Minnesota, 2016, I got it right here too, if anybody questions that right here. 2016 GDP for Minnesota, 1.3% growth, downtrending, ranking us 23rd. That's this side. Back to what this bill really does. What this bill does, by giving the opportunity and generating economic growth, we create opportunity for Minnesotans to continue to support all these programs that we have in the state of Minnesota that are critical to our seniors, to our pensioners, to keep the promises. Members, we need economic growth, we need productivity, we need more from an economy that's sluggish and trending down. And that's what this bill does. It'll create opportunity. Voting yes for this bill means you're voting yes for seniors, you're voting yes to farmers, you're voting yes for college students, you're voting yes to K-12, you are voting yes for Main Street businesses, small businesses all across the state. Members, by voting yes on this bill, you are voting to support helping out families with children with dependent child care credits. So members, and there's a lot more that this bill does, TIFs and local option sales taxes for your communities. But this bill gives opportunity to every Minnesotan in a variety of ways, directly and indirectly. Voting yes to this conference committee report, we'll send it to the governor and say, we want to give opportunity to all Minnesotans, school children, college kids, farmers, citizens, small businesses, senior citizens who are going to need it, child care. So members, a yes vote is a good thing for the state of Minnesota, it's a good thing for the Senate, and it's a good thing for the governor. But most of all, it's not only good for us, it is extremely good and needed in the state of Minnesota for every citizen that works hard every day, gets up, and toils for their family. Thank you.
Senator Chamberlain renews his motion that the conference committee report be adopted. On that motion, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. The motion does prevail. The secretary will give the bill its third reading.
House File Number 4, a bill for an act relating to financing and operation of state and local government.
Third reading. The secretary will take the roll on House File 4.
It would put the constitutional rights of Minnesotans at risk by
All senators having voted who desire to vote, the secretary will close the roll. There being 34 ayes and 32 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to.